Good morning. Welcome to Yin, or whatever time of the day it is, wherever you are. We will use quite a bit of props today. If you don't have any, it's fine. I'll give you modifications for that. But if you do, great time to grab them. So a couple of blocks could be a good idea, but these are actually the ones that you might not need as much as everything else. So if you have a block or two, grab them or something like it. A yoga strap is great, or a belt, even a t-shirt or a towel. And then a bolster, which a lot of people don't have. It's not a big deal if you don't have this. You could also use a folded blanket or towel, or even a pillow. Some of us have pillows that are this size on our sofa or bed. And again, don't worry if you don't have it. It's not a big deal. So we'll start today seated, coming into an easy cross-legged seat. You could prop the hips up if you want to on a block, bolster, blanket, any of the props that I just mentioned. But you'll sit up tall, close the eyes, lower the shoulders down the back, rise up through the crown of the head. Hug the belly in. So when you hug the belly in, that helps you support the lower back. The lower back is our volunteer. It wants to help with everything. And the abs are the opposite. So they don't want to help with anything. And you have to ask them and get them engaged in order to help out the lower back. So think about those two working together. And open up across the chest. Take a deep breath in through the nose. Back out through the mouth, let that go. Smooth breath in through the nose, fill all the way up. Exhale out of the mouth, let it go. Last one like that, cleansing breath. Deep breath in. Slow breath out through the mouth. This time breathing in through the nose. Back out through the nose. Keep going a couple more times on your own, just like this. Feeling the breath move up and down the back of the throat. Keeping it somewhat audible so you can hear it. But someone in the next room probably can't. We'll blink open the eyes and start to come into our first pose, which will be child's pose today. So you'll come to hands and knees. And if you know your child's pose, go ahead and get into it. Big toes together, hips come back, forehead comes down, hands down on the mat. You can keep it as relaxed as you want. So elbows can come down, forearms can rest. Maybe the hands come in toward the center. That's fine too. So that's the upper body. Lower body, if you're feeling anything in the knees, then the hips need to come up until the knees start to quiet down. And they can come up as high as you need them to. That'll shift the rest of the pose, the upper body. That's fine. Just keep the forehead down on something, the mat. You could even use a block if the forehead is having a hard time going all the way down. And another good way to use props, if you have them, you could take a blanket or a bolster behind the knees. And that works really well if the hips are up a little higher. It just gives the hips something to come down to. And maybe they never touch, but just the feeling that a little bit of a light touch behind the thighs can sometimes help the hips release a little bit more. So that's another option there. And as you're in your child's pose, starting to feel a little heavier on the mat, noticing where in the body you're feeling effort and where you're feeling ease. Can you find a balance between the two? Or maybe lean more toward ease and away from effort. We do want some effort, but not a lot, more ease. The breath is a great tool for that. If in your child's pose you feel any tingling in the hands, you can widen the arms a little bit. If it's bothering the shoulders or a shoulder, you can bring that arm back or both arms back. That's another good adjustment. And if child's pose simply isn't working in your body, you can always lie flat on your stomach, one hand on top of the other, resting the forehead on the hands. We'll start to transition out of child's pose, lifting the head, looking forward, coming up to hands and knees. So separating the feet, keeping the feet right behind you. So the big toes aren't together, but they're pointing straight back. Keep the hip right over the knees. They'll want to go forward. Just walk the hands forward. Bring the forehead back down. So hips are high for everybody. This is an upper body opening. So with the arms out in front of you, you should feel like the chest is reaching forward rather than down toward the mat. Hug the belly in a little bit to protect that lower back. Sometimes the lower back wants to dip down. When you hug the belly in, it keeps the lower back long. Hips right over the knees, friendly reminder. So you keep those thighs vertical. When we bring the hips forward, we take away from the upper body opening, and that's where we're trying to get into. And then same thing here. If there's any tingling in the hands, arms, you can widen the arms as much as you need to until that goes away. It also gives the shoulders a little bit more space if you're feeling any tightness there. And if you need to back off, let the elbows come down. You can even just rest the hands one on top of the other. And this is still a really nice place to be with the upper body opening. In fact, I tried it and now I'm staying here because it feels so good. And stay with your breath deeply in through the nose, back out through the nose. Seeing if you can send the breath to the area of the body that needs it the most. So for the majority of us in this pose, that's probably the upper body. This is called the melting heart pose in yin. And can be kind of intense for some of us. Some of us love back bends. Some of us find a little bit more resistance in back bends, and that's okay. And keep doing them to get more comfortable with them. And also to take away any rounding that's starting to happen in the upper back, getting the spine going in the opposite direction. We'll start to lift the head, come back up onto hands and knees, probably feeling a whole lot more open in the upper body. Let's do a few rounds of cat-cow. So stack the shoulders over the wrists, hips over the knees. On the inhale, reach the heart forward, a familiar shape. And on the exhale, round the spine. This should feel pretty good going in the opposite direction. Inhale forward. Exhale round. So keep it slow. You can close the eyes, go at your own pace, follow your own breath. One more cycle, forward and back. Back to a neutral spine. Bring the feet over to one side and come to seated on your mat. So legs out in front of you. You'll just want to scoot forward a little bit. If you have a strap or whatever you're using as a strap, just have that nearby. If you feel like the hips are tight when you're seated on the mat, you could sit up on a block for the next few poses that we're doing. So from here, walk this left foot in and see if you're comfortable crossing the left foot over the right leg. If that's good, stay there. You could also grab the outer ankle on the left foot and bring the foot out to the side. So you're working towards stacking the left knee over the right knee. Doesn't have to be perfect. It might look like the knee's still up really high, and that's fine too. So you want to be even on both sit bones. Maybe we stay like this with this right leg extended. Other option, and it intensifies the pose. So skip it if it doesn't work. Lean to the right, bend this bottom leg, the right leg, and then the feet are out to the side. So they might be closer to the hips. They might be out toward the knees. The most important part is that both hips are down on the mat. If they're not, then you come back a step and extend the right leg. And if none of this is working, you can bring the sole of the right foot in, or sole of the left foot inside the right leg. So find something that makes sense. Left knee on top of right, sitting up tall, and we'll come into a gentle twist. So open the chest to the left, and maybe you take this right arm to the thigh if that's working. Just don't go all the way into the twist. We're going part of the way. So this twist is a nice way to release back bends. We're also starting to transition into the hips with the shape that the legs are in. We'll start to unwind. Keep the legs, just bring the chest forward. Grab your strap or whatever you're using as a strap. You'll want to grab it in the right hand. So once you have it in the right hand, this is the longest strap. Just reach up with that right arm and the strap is in the hand. And then hang that strap between the shoulder blades. So you're bending at the elbow and you're just hanging it down the back. Left arm comes out to the side, thumb side down. Bring the left arm behind the back and start to work that hand up the back. It's not as high as you can go, just go part of the way. Once you find your place, grab the strap. So both hands grabbing the strap. Sit up as tall as you can, and that right elbow is hugging in, pointing up, left elbow's down and back. And then we'll slowly start to fold forward. So you're not going to come forward all that far, just come part of the way. Close the eyes and breathe here. So this is full body. We're in the hips and legs, and we're definitely into the shoulders and the arms. And if at any point it becomes a little too intense and you're starting to lose your breath, or if the heart rate's starting to pick up, separate the hands a little bit more. That's why it's nice to have something between the hands, because it's easier to modify while you're in the pose to find that space where you can be without much thinking or doing. Just feeling your way into it. What happens in yin with these poses, the longer holds with less effort, is you start to fall deeper into the pose, which is why we stay away from our edge. Just allow that to happen if it is. And we'll slowly start to make our way back up. Keep the legs, keep the arms, just bring the head back over the hips. And then you can release the arms and the strap off to the side. Then bring the hands back behind you. If this bottom leg is extended or is bent, extend it out in front of you first, and then the top leg. And then still recline, leaning back onto the hands. Separate the feet so that they're the outer edges of the mat, if you're using one, are just wider than the hips. And then you'll move the knees side to side like windshield wipers. So we want to keep the feet wide when we do this. So that way you feel a little bit of mobility in the hips, kind of shaking off that last posture before we come in on the other side. Okay, so back up to center, extending the legs out in front of you to start. Bring this right foot in, bending the legs, step the right foot over the left leg, and listen to what's happening. It might be different on this side. Maybe you lean to the left and bring that left leg back. So both hips are down on the mat. You're trying to bring this left foot out to the left, working towards stacked knees. And if this bothers your knees, then you just go back a step. So that left leg can come forward, or right foot inside of the left leg. But if this is working, this shoelace is what it's called in yin, then stay here. Then we'll start with that twist. So open the chest to the right hand comes back behind you. Maybe the left forearm just rests on top of this right thigh, but try to stay away from your edge. So just go part of the way in. Your body will naturally probably go a little bit deeper if it's feeling good in your body. Make sure you're pressing down into both sit bones and breathe into the twist. And slowly start to unwind the upper body facing forward. Grab your strap in the left hand this time. So reach the left arm up as you hang onto the strap, and then bend the left elbow, Hang that strap down between the shoulder blades. Right arm comes out to the side, thumb side down. Bring the right arm back behind you and then work the hand up the back, but don't go as far as you can possibly go. Keep it soft and easy. Sit up tall, grab the strap. And then as much as you want, start to lean forward. So when you lean forward, you're putting some weight on the hips, intensifying the hip opening. So find a place where it still feels like you can breathe easily. The heart rate's not picking up. And you can be somewhat still in the pose. Last few breaths here. See what else there is. We'll start to bring the chest back up, head over the hips. Once you're back up to seated, release the arms, set the strap or whatever you're using off to the side. Hands come back behind you. Bottom leg extends if that's bent, and then the top leg. And we'll come back into windshield wipers. So still leaning back on the hands, walk the feet out wide, bending the legs, and we'll just move the knees side to side. So as an internal rotation of the hips, we'll stay with that coming into the next pose. Sometimes it's harder on our knees for those of us that have any knee trauma. So I'm trying to give you lots of options to modify so you can still get into the hips and be gentle with the knees. So we'll come back to center, back to tabletop. Once you come back to tabletop, you'll probably need a prop. So a block, a blanket, or a bolster. I'll probably use a blanket. So once you can just have them on the sides of the mat. That's the easiest place to reach them. So once you're in tabletop, bring the knees all the way together so they're touching. And then from here, feet go a little wider. So think about if you were going to sit back between the feet, you want your hips to fit between the feet. And then take the calf muscle with the hands, and it's like you're moving them out, and that gives your knees a little bit more space to bend. So we are going to be sitting back between the heels. The thing is, the hips need to touch something. So when you sit back between the heels, if your hips are not completely down on the mat, that's where you use a prop. So a blanket could go underneath the hips, a block or two. That block has 3 heights. So your saddle might be up pretty high, and that's totally fine. A bolster can go between the feet. You're just trying to fill in that space just right so the hips really touch down. And I'm realizing this is too low for me, so I'm going to come back to the bolster and see if that works. Yep, good. Okay, so from here, just rest the hands on the thighs, sit up tall. And this is saddle. So it's a nice stretch for the quads. It's also a great stretch for the knees. But if it's bothering you, you can come to kneeling so that the feet are together and you're sitting on the heels, or you can just come to seated if you truly know this is not working well for your knees at all. And that can be very common. So sitting up tall, keeping the chest open, eyes can be closed, come back to your breath. And to keep that internal rotation of the hips, it's as if the inner thighs are rolling down toward the mat. Tops of the feet are pressing down onto the mat. That's where the ankle stretch comes in. Outer ankles are hugging in a tiny bit. They're just not bowing out toward the mat. And then see where you can soften. Hug the belly in a little bit so you take any rounding out of the lower back. And we'll all be really different with how this shape takes place in the body. So I'll give you a couple more options to intensify things. If you're good here, stay here. You could start to walk the hands back to recline and see how that goes. Some people can lay all the way back. I am not one of those people, but if you know you are, come down onto the forearms and you can lay all the way back. So typically if your bum is a little lower to the mat, it's easier to do that. You also want to keep that lower back long. So if you are reclined back, the tailbone's going forward. It's not reaching toward the back of the mat. So this is about as far as I can go without too much discomfort. But if you're down lower and it's feeling great, stay there. Don't worry, you're in a great shape. And if you're nowhere near where I am and you're still sitting up tall, that's fine too. Knees are still down on the mat. If they're lifting, come back up a little bit until you can keep them down. And we are trying to keep the knees together, but sometimes they go a little bit apart, and that's fine. Especially if it brings more ease to the pose. So in yin, we call this pose saddle. In Sanskrit, virasana. And if you're reclined back, supta virasana. Supta meaning reclined. And if you're all the way down onto your back, start to work your way up to the forearms, slowly transitioning. Then once you're on the forearms, you'll come back up onto the hands, meeting me. And then you'll start to walk the hands forward, bringing the head right over the hips. And then we'll all come forward onto hands and knees. If you have something underneath the hips, just set it off to the side so it's out of the way. It could be back of the mat or side of the mat. Back to hands and knees, and you'll just bring the feet over to one side and extend the legs out in front of you. So this will feel really good. Legs have been bent for quite a bit. And we're coming into caterpillar, which is just a seated forward fold. So keep it easy. Lots of rounding in the spine is totally fine. Start to fold forward over the legs. Let the hands rest on something, whether that's the legs or the mat. You could even use blocks, and that's really nice too, because you can use them as armrests, turn the palms up. So when we turn the palms up, it takes away the urge to reach forward. Toes are pointing up, so you keep the back sides of the legs long. You just start to fold in, closing the eyes. Another great way to use the block is you could put it the narrow way between the calves. And maybe you make a little stack and you could rest the forehead on the block. And when you know there's that pressure point in the forehead that kicks the relaxation response in. So this can be a nice way to be in this pose too. That's what's great about props is they just enhance your practice. And the more you use them, the better you get at using them. So they just fill in any spaces between the body and the mat. Or the ground. You don't even need a mat for yin. See if you can stay in the same shape, but just release the legs a little bit. So see where you can soften. We'll start to bring the head back up. If you're using blocks or anything, you can set them off to the side. If you have a bolster or something like it, you may want to bring that off to the side of the mat. You may or may not use it in this next part of the sequence, or a blanket, whatever you have. Blocks would be nice though for this next part. So we'll come to hands and knees. So back to hands and knees. And really the blocks just make the transition a little easier, but you can definitely do it without blocks. So if you have blocks, bring the blocks up to the tallest height right underneath the hands and stay there. If you don't have blocks, I'll show you how to do it without blocks. Still totally fine. So hands and knees, but maybe the hands are propped up on blocks. Step the right foot forward. So if you do that without blocks, you'll need to lean over to the left to get that right foot forward, and that's fine. So we're coming into a low lunge, but we're going to keep the chest low. So you can snug the right side of the torso inside of the right thigh if you want to go a little deeper. You could scoot that back knee back by tucking the back toes and scooting the knee back a little bit. And then hands can be on blocks at whatever height makes the most sense, or maybe you skip the blocks altogether. That's up to you. We really were just using the blocks to transition to get that front foot forward. So now you're in it. These lunges in yin we call dragons. So this is baby dragon. You can let the head and the neck go, close the eyes. What's nice about leaning forward like this and kind of resting that right shoulder on the right thigh is you put a little bit more weight onto the hips as you open them in the lunge. And we'll start to lift the chest up one hand at a time, bring it up to this front thigh, and just start to peel the chest away from the thigh. So it's going to get a little bit deeper in that left hip. And then we'll just stay here. So you can look down. If you close your eyes, you might lose your balance and get a little bit more wobbly. So if you look down, you keep the eyelids covering most of the eye, and that can be nice and relaxing. Hands on the thigh just to keep your stability. And breathing here. So this is low flying dragon. So you'll start to lean forward, grab your blocks if you're using them. No big deal if you don't have them, and just walk them back so they're underneath the shoulders. If you have a bolster or a blanket, you'll just slide that the wide way, right up against this left thigh, and then you'll bring the hands back to the blocks. So we'll start with half splits or dragon splits. Shift the hips back, coming up onto this front heel with the toes pointing up, and then push that heel forward. And that left thigh will be up against the bolster or blanket, whatever you have. Chest is reaching forward. You can stay right here. This is dragon splits. some of you might be comfortable going into a fuller version of split. So if that's the case, you tuck the back toes, you shift that back leg back, and this is where the bolster is really nice, or something underneath you, especially if it's a little taller. Hands can stay on the blocks, and you can even lift the blocks up a little bit higher. You can stay in your dragon splits this way. If it's too much, then just come back to half splits or somewhere in between. All of that works. So you're trying to find how open are your legs? Where do you get a nice therapeutic opening in all those muscles in the backside of that right leg? And then also the hips in your dragon splits. And then know that we're going to be here for a little bit. So you really want to make sure that you're comfortable. So you're not straining to stay in the pose. And we'll start to come back. So lifting the hips, bringing the feet closer together until you can bring this right knee back behind you, coming back into tabletop. And we'll take a child's pose as a counter. So you can set the blocks off to the side. If you have a bolster or something like it, you can just turn it right in front of you, bring the knees just at the bottom edge of the bolster, the blanket. And if you don't have anything in front of you, it's totally fine. You can just come into traditional child's pose, start to come down. If you do have something in front of you, you'll want to turn the head to one side. We'll stay here for about a minute. Let yourself rest. Elbows are resting heavy on the mat, which means the arms are probably bent. Hands are softly on the mat. Hips are as high as you need them to be. So the dragon splits is a bigger pose, one we've worked toward through this sequence. So we just want to bring the energy down a little bit with this counter pose before we start working on the other side. And we'll come back up to tabletop. If you have something underneath you, you could just turn it, set it off to the side, and you can use it when we get to the splits portion of the sequence. So blocks underneath the hands at the tallest height for this transition. If you don't have blocks, I'll show you how to do it without blocks. Shift over to the right, step that left foot forward, and we're in our baby dragon. So I like to take the left side of my torso and bring it inside the thigh, hands either on the mat or blocks at whatever height makes the most sense. So you can really adjust the pose a whole lot with blocks and find your place that you want to be in. And that back knee can go back a little bit more if you wanted to, tucking the back toes and scooting it back. Sometimes when we do that, it feels like it hardly shifts at all, and that's fine. Maybe it doesn't. Even if you move it a ton, it's still really not that much. You're just going more toward the top of the kneecap or maybe even above it toward the thigh. You'll start to come up. So coming up onto the fingertips or higher on the blocks, one hand at a time up to this left thigh. Start to peel the chest away from the thigh. And we'll stay here looking down for our low flying dragon. And I didn't mention it on the first side, but if you need padding underneath the right knee, that's fine. Grab a towel or double up your mat. Typically, if you need padding, if you do need padding for the knees, you're probably already there, and that's great. I just wanted to reinforce that option. And we'll start to come down. Here's where we'll grab the bolster or a blanket, whatever we have. And if you don't have anything, you don't have to have it. It's fine. And if you do, just bring it all the way up against that right thigh. Grab your blocks if you're using them, lift the chest and start to shift the hips back, lifting the toes on the left foot. And then we push that heel forward just until the hips feel like they're side by side. So this is half splits. Stay here. If you want to go into a fuller version of splits, you'll start to tuck the back toes, shift that back leg first as far back as you can get it. It can always go, the front leg can always go further than the back leg. And you might feel a difference on one side. This side, I'm definitely more open than the other side. That's fine. Keep the chest somewhat lifted wherever you are. If you're in half splits, the chest is just reaching forward a little bit. And to come out, you'll start to lift the hips, slide that left foot back in. And then when you're ready, bringing that left knee back behind you, coming back to tabletop. Set the blocks off to the side if you're using them. If you have a bolster or something like it, turn it so it's the narrow way. Back to child's pose. So big toes together, knees apart. If you're using something, you just bring it to the very, the knees are just at the bottom edge of whatever you're using so the torso has support. Walk the hands forward, and this time turn the head the other way. So not the same way you did before, to even out the neck. Unless you're not using anything underneath you, then the forehead is just coming straight down. So we're really going to start to slow it down. That was our peak, which we don't always have in yin, but we did today. Getting a little bit deeper into the legs, the hips, definitely still full body. We'll start to make our way back up to hands and knees. If you're using a bolster, have something in front of you, just set it off to the side. Come to seated on the mat with the legs extended out in front of you. Scoot yourself forward so the hips are more toward the center of the mat and you have plenty of space back behind you. Lie down onto your back. Hug the right knee in toward the chest. Extend the left leg out in front of you. And then we're coming into a spinal twist. You'll take this right knee, cross it over the body. You need to shift a little bit so you can get that left hip right underneath you and the right hip on top of the left hip. Right arm reaches back behind you. And this is our last twist. Eyes can be closed. Try to stay away from your edge so it's not your deepest twist. You can go most of the way in. We'll start to make our way onto our backs. Stay on your back once you find center. We'll counterpose that twist before we go over to the other side. So you'll grab onto the knees, keeping the knees and the feet together, and you'll just start to move the knees in circles. So keep the knees together, go in one direction with your circles. You can kind of just feel the spine roll around on the mat, the back side of the hips. Just a nice way to kind of shake off some of that twist before we go over to the other side, especially since it was a longer hold. Switch the direction of the circles, go the other way so we keep things even. And you'll set the feet back down onto the mat, keeping the legs bent. Hug the left knee in toward the chest. Extend that right leg forward. And just start here. You're bringing the left knee in. Right leg extends out in front of you. Then you'll take this left knee, cross it over the body, shifting onto the side of the right hip, reaching that left arm back behind you, starting to come into the twist on this side. Staying away from your edge, finding a good place to be. Well, we're doing the same amount of time we did on the first side. So now you have a better way of gauging that. the right position for you on this side. We'll start to come back to center, using the feet to get there. Find center on your back. Same counter pose as before. Bring the knees in, grab onto each knee with each hand, keep the knees and the feet together, and start to take a circle, going in the same direction. Keep going. Switch the direction, go the other way. And you'll set the feet back down onto the mat. Coming into Shavasana, if you have props, use them. So if you have a bolster or a blanket, slide that underneath the knees. It just elevates the knees enough so that you can bring a little bit more freedom to the lower back. And you can take Shavasana this way. If you don't have a blanket or a bolster, but you have blocks, you can do something really similar. You just take each block on the lowest height. You want to bring them a little bit wider so that the legs can go a little bit wider and get them more underneath the thighs than the knees. Come on down onto your back. You might need to adjust a little bit. And then arms come out to the side. Knees are still elevated with support, and you still feel that space in the lower back. Wherever you are, take a deeper breath in through the nose, back out through the nose. Let go of that breath control, dropping right into your Shavasana. Also known as corpse pose. Practicing this peacefulness for our very last breath. Also, finding a place of acceptance in that same moment. You'll start to wiggle the fingers and the toes, finding your way back to the body. Then you can reach the arms overhead, finding a stretch. Start to walk the feet in, bending the legs. You can put the feet on the bolster or the blanket. If you're using blocks, you can shift those out of the way with the feet. Then roll over onto your right side, cradle the head and the arm, keep the eyes closed. So as you roll to your side, coming off of your back, starting this transition back into the body, back into your day, but not rushing through it. Take a deeper breath in through the nose, softly out through the mouth. Use the left hand to press yourself up to an easy cross-legged seat, sitting up tall, the eyes closed, coming into your meditation. You're welcome to stay in your meditation, put me on pause or shut me off and continue on. Otherwise, closing together, bring the hands together in front of you, maintain the lift of the chest. As you start to bow the head, taking a moment to honor and acknowledge your heart and spirit, shining bright, as well as everyone around you. Bring the head back up, blink open the eyes. Namaste. Thank you so much for joining in. Feel free to share this class with anyone that you think would benefit from stretching, some inner peace, and getting into the body with some light movement.